Hi, everyone. Good morning. Okay, I'm on. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here. And today I'll talk about some previous decentralized and local projects and hopefully manage to share why I think local and accountable forms of computing are interesting, joyful, and fun to create with others. My name is Dawn. As you heard, I'm a designer and researcher. I'm usually based on unceded and ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples in so-called New Westminster, BC. Probably like many of you, I was captivated by computers early on, and they've been a part of a number of formative childhood memories. Though my understanding of what I was doing in those moments has probably changed over time. For example, I thought we were playing Civ 1 in my elementary school computer lab, but have since realized we were actually just trying to get through the copy protection quiz at the beginning without a manual, by building up kind of like a shared knowledge amongst us of what those answers were and many unsuccessful attempts. And though unfortunately, I have only memories. While I was preparing this talk, I thought I'd get one of those like cute at a computer young photos to share with you. And I asked my mom if she had any old pictures of me, but she sent me this instead, which is me holding our pet garter snake. So I'll offer this to you. So yeah, in my bio, it said, while I'm interested in technology, it's always been about other things, what possibilities for a better world it could enable. And to think about those, I like to use the framework of just transition. Here you see a portion of a rather elaborate diagram from the Climate Justice Alliance with the words, stop the bad, build the new. And under an arrow with another phrase, solutions that are visionary and oppositional. A just transition is aiming to ensure that no one is left behind or pushed behind while building economic and political power. I think most of my projects are a way to ask myself, what could computers call into the present? How do they build alternatives, especially in this moment, AKA my entire adult life, when it feels like everything is already falling apart? To set the stage for the rest of this talk, I wanted to rewind back to 2015. I've just spent 9 hours on a megabus headed to New York from Toronto to attend what will be the first of many radical networks. After 2 dizzying days of workshops and talks about DIY networking, mesh, and offline networks, where I meet some people who are also from Toronto that I didn't know before, I leave and take a bus back home, wishing events and projects like that were nearby and local to me. Back where I live, through Civic Tech Toronto, which is a still running, I think also decade-long weekly hack night, I meet others interested in those topics, and we set out as Toronto Mesh, testing antennas, configuring mesh nodes. We started with a Raspberry Pi using CJDNS, and hosting workshops, all the while scheming about a first line of sight connection. This is one of the other TO Mesh members, Ben, circa 2016, I think. TO Mesh today is largely dormant and probably didn't achieve our wildest dreams. Fair, they were pretty big. But I organized an event on January 2017 called State of Our Networks. And to some extent, I've sort of been like on this path ever since. With that title, I was drawing inspiration from Bruce LeBouse and GB Jones, who called into existence the Toronto queercore punk scene of the 1980s and 90s. I was acting as if there was already multiple overlapping projects in a similar. It wasn't, it was just us. But part of what GB Jones and Bruce LeBouse were doing was art project, part necessary for life. And it was covering a culture that didn't yet exist in their zine JDs and presenting it as if it was already there. And as I said, after that first event, I've been in some sort of way doing this ever since, in kind of like a Katamari Damacy voyage through networking and that infrastructure. Before I talk about some of the projects, I just want to like mess up what might sound like a tidy narrative. As this was happening, what I was actually supposed to be doing was researching tools, maps, and information systems that aided urban agriculture, and with an eye to questions of participation, but somehow figuring out whether, how, or if more distributed and local networks could fit in became like a side quest that turned into a main quest. It showed up in a project to preserve access to data about climate and the environment when supporting institutions may no longer be able to or desire to. During times of perhaps political instability, remember early 2017, we wound up creating an open source prototype for decentralized storage and verification of archive web pages and data sets, as well as piloted the social apparatuses around it. It also connected me to a group of collaborators and comrades who I eventually started a tech worker co-op with in order to consider the labor that goes into the projects we all work on. This is not an image from our co-op, it's from another one, IMOL Arts and Technology Co-op that I particularly love. Also more on this theme later. It also got into my head during my PhD and eventually led me to trace how one particular value in design, decentralization, was being deployed in a divergent range of topics. Also more on that later. And then finally, we'll see how it crops up in my current role as a service designer for the Environmental Protection Division of my provincial government. Though I have to make a typical disclaimer, these opinions are my own and do not reflect my employer's. So, revisiting our networks. We just wrapped the 6 R networks this summer. Our theme was Does Not Cloud Compute, and we were inspired by practices that transition using local first software, that adopt folk software tactics, and that are based in repair culture guided by perma-computing principles. We're always trying to balance a few different things. Like first, how do we look to the past without engaging in nostalgia? Second, how do we connect to what people are already doing right now? And then third, how do we think from both of those about a future in which many futures fit? This year in particular, I think really rooted in place, we were curious about experiments in telecommunication arts in the 1970s and 80s in Vancouver and Victoria by artists at 3 media arts centers. Hank Bull out of Western Front and Bill Bartlett from Open Space in particular put on a series of performances with what was an emerging technology at the time, slow scan television. It's a low bandwidth way of transmitting images using radio frequencies that also produces an audible tone. Artists would participate by transmitting and receiving each other's performances at pre-specified times, but all of that coordination had to be done out of band. Speaking with Hank Bull about this interplay of kind of that coordination and that technology, it highlighted, if it wasn't already apparent to us, all the ways that all that is required to develop and share new practices, if it wasn't already on our minds. On the screen is a photo. I went too fast. On a screen is a photo by Sharon Lovett from the Vivo Media Arts Center page of one of those performances. To learn more, we went and visited the archives. We got permission to share some of the material and recordings of the performance on a local network that we hosted at the event. We created the site to do so. We also made a zine about those visits and digital archiving, which lays out some perspective protocols, see what I did there, to do amateur event archiving with open source tools and hosted services, though the same ones that we've been using over the years. That includes the Internet Archive upload feature, wget, Mailman, and Git. I know, bold choice. We also referenced those slow scan performances in our stream. We set up a Raspberry Pi running FFmpeg and Media MTX to create a low bandwidth stream equivalent. It only used 8 shades of black and gray, less than a frame per second, alongside the audio track of the day. Preparing for this led to some real FFmpeg hair pulling moments, and I might now understand filters. I'm going to claim that. In previous editions, we also developed a way to stream over IPFS, a protocol for distributed file sharing and storage using content addressing. At the same time that viewers could select streaming over HTTP. For our 2022 edition, we held a series of online write-a-thons in place of a typical conference, where we co-wrote a wiki representing an artifact from 20 years in the future, in 2047. Our aim was to collectively narrate the steps that it might take to get there from our present. We hosted our own media wiki, along with a guide on how to speculate together with care. Who knew the future would arrive on a wiki? Certainly not me. What we wound up with was a fabulated conference program full of groups, ideas, and moments that have yet to be, but are suggestive of directions to head. We closed it to editing after the event, took it down, generated a static version that worked locally, and sent that out to registered attendees via USB with an accompanying zine. I've been talking mostly about an event, but it's not the only container to explore new practices around computing through. As mentioned in my bio, another one is that I've been looking at is what formal and durable structures help scaffold practices and allow them to last. Through Toronto Mesh, I met a group of collaborators and comrades. Over a lot of time and many conversations, we decided to start a tech worker co-op to hopefully earn a living around our various open source schemes. It was a crash course in learning about all of the traditional roles and structures and reporting requirements that are enshrined in law to operate as a firm. We all got to be member owners with an equal percentage. We opted to be a nonprofit. We strove for a flat structure with a largely ceremonial board, pushing as many governance decisions as possible to the day-to-day operational layer. And that day-to-day, I think, looked pretty similar as it could elsewhere. It involved client-based work, some in this space, some with arts organizations, nonprofits, or companies, alongside a mix of our own projects. We started by self-hosting, probably too many things, but also aligning that with existing services to set up a virtual office, and committed to sharing openly. We also got to, maybe this is more like had to, think through those decision points and operational rhythms that help us maintain what it is we wanted to do together. Shout out to that organization, Haifa, which is still going strong. I'm no longer with the co-op, but after that DIY introduction, I've helped others incorporate since. Most recently, I've been a member of CoSocial, small plug, a community service cooperative, also a nonprofit, that is formed to run a Mastodon instance in so-called Canada. There's a lot of direct inspiration that I personally drew from in being a part of this, including democratically run formal and informal co-ops of all types that have been formed around tech infrastructure. Social.coop is another Fediverse one. Meet.coop for video, it's Big Blue Button based. And finally, May 1st, Movement Technology for like the nitty gritty of a range of shared infrastructure, particularly mail servers, can't believe they do that, who have operated as a co-op for almost 20 years. To help myself make sense of what I've been doing, I wanted to talk through kind of the set of slowly accumulating ideas that have guided me. Perhaps most obvious for the language of networks, I spent a lot of time thinking about decentralization and distribution. Both are terms with long histories, which, as you also have probably noticed, are having recent waves of interest as part of calls to take back control of our data, the web, the internet. There's sort of a rough story there that goes something like, the internet was originally designed to be decentralized, and while that ideal persists on infrastructure no single authority can own, increasingly the things we do on it and parts of how it operates are controlled by a handful of companies. This story has been told by various groups, from that Bitcoin white paper way back in 2008, 9, social movement, early social networks, including Diaspora, remember 2010? I barely do. Or movements and design patterns like IndieWeb. I think its first camp was like also around that time, to more recently in 2015, the decentralized web community with their collectively authored set of principles that focus on human agency, and an event series originally convened by the Internet Archive. There was just a recent DWeb camp nearby here in August, and I kind of suspect some people in the audience attended. And also through something like Web3, which was coined around the same time and has an accompanying foundation. However, while being popular, the term decentralization I find pretty slippery. A decentralized network could look like a lot of different things. It could be like that famous image of a majority of Bitcoin miners all sitting together on a stage. It could also look like a geographically distributed group who are running nodes and on some sort of network that they've built together, but they wind up all being on Amazon AWS. Or it could be like a peer-to-peer social media where your identity is tied to your individual device, and you keep a copy of all of that on your local hard drive. And if you lose that, it's going to be a little bit hard to get back on. I won't trace all the twists of this recent wave of interest or unpack sort of these ebbs and flows, but if you want to have this conversation, come find me after. I'm here all weekend. But to make a long story short, decentralization is inflected by context. The decentralization of the DWeb community and their collectively authored principles is not the same as the fever dream of decentralization to win the future that was pushed heavily by venture capitalist firms like Andreessen Horowitz, maybe most popularly starting in 2021, 2022. Thankfully, well, maybe not thankfully, but we've seen some market corrections, which has sort of lessened that fever dream. And there's been a pivot to the next big thing, AI, which I will not talk about. For me, the recently ascendant visions of decentralization feel a bit like a dead end for some of those more transitional and interesting and emancipatory versions. And so I'm cautious about how to use the term. I feel like at times it gets to be more unhelpful than clarifying. And what I've seen often is that, like, when you use it, a popular but broadly imprecise idea gets communicated, and it doesn't actually help align individual interests, and it has a flexibility that both is an opportunity but a challenge. And here I'm contextualizing a meme from Sarah Friend. So that's roughly where I wound up at the end of my PhD. Decentralization doesn't capture everything I might want. I have some reservations. So why not use the word local instead? Okay, I didn't exactly bandwagon jump then. This is just me trying to do a bridge and a talk. Others far sharper than me have taken a different approach to thinking about the same issues decentralistas name. The things that we do in our computers are controlled by a handful of companies. They don't give us a say over what they do with it or how we can use their services. Ink and Switch, an independent research lab, published an article in 2019 called Local First Software. It's excellent. If you haven't checked it out, maybe do. They also have a reference implementation that's quite popular, built that kind of like models these ideals. They lay out a set of ideals that would enable software to support both real-time collaboration, which to me right now is probably one of the main things I'm doing with other people online, and ownership for users. As opposed to putting all your data on a server somewhere and then being stuck when that service shuts down, starts platforming fascists, stops working on your devices, or like somehow experiences catastrophic data loss. I won't go through all of these in depth, but those 7 ideals cover the idea that we shouldn't have to wait for our data. It should follow us across our devices. It shouldn't matter if we're offline or not. And if we do go offline, it should eventually sync and gracefully resolve those conflicts once we come back. That access should persist for a very long time in a secure and private way we have a say in. They also reference data structures like CRDTs, conflict-free replicated data types that they see as foundational. When they talk about local, it's often explicitly about data, storage, and networks. For me, the term, though, also broadly explains a thing I want my projects to do. When I'm referencing something like decentralization, I mean something like, I want the site of control to be closer to me, or it could be me, or me and my friends. I don't want that responsibility, or an organization I run. That nearness, that proximity to me and my goals is supported by thinking local to me because it implies a location, a specific place in a network. It also helps that local first, I think, works against the grain of the current web, which assumes a universal type of user that's always connected and steadily powered, which has led to experiences that already and always continue to leave people behind. Brooklyn Zelenka, who spoke at our networks about local first, also gave a status update on those 7 ideals. She mentions that some of them have a lot of progress made, some are actively where work is happening, and a couple have open problems for the next era of work. She also set expectations. I'm stealing a slide from her deck, it's amazing, where local first is not even at the early adoption phase. It's got to get over a first chasm before it moves into from a group of innovators into early adopters. Mauve Sineweaver, in their talk on holistic local first software on the peer-to-peer web at Causal Islands, also points out that with local first, you get to kind of revisit certain questions of complexity and figure out where you want them to show up. Certain types of complexity maybe could even be avoided in a traditional flow, say, for instance, bespoke deployments, and the need for like a lot of DevOps knowledge. All of this leaves me feeling hopeful and in a pragmatic way that I can work with, full of ideas for future projects. Next, I just want to pull quickly on a thread of being in a place. And so I reread this paper from Lucy Suchman that always sticks with me, Located Accountabilities in Technology Production. Suchman is a design practitioner and academic who worked at Xerox PARC for over 20 years. In 2002, she was writing about what an alternative practice of technology production and use could look like. Key to her was focusing on all that work that's required to actually stabilize a new technology, and that an awareness of one's location within an extended network of relations. With that awareness, she says there comes a sort of recognition that developers don't have all the control, and that the question at each turn should become, how do we proceed in a responsible way? In the paper, Suchman also lays out how a lack of awareness results in a design from nowhere. And to paraphrase her, what that means is people problematize the world in such a way that their very specific skill is indispensable to it, and then they discuss an obligation they have to intervene. Ultimately, to her, these ways of being nowhere, while claiming to see comprehensively, need to be replaced with a view from somewhere, a located accountability. And I think that's something like what a local orientation to software and computing can provide. A way to become answerable for what we learn how to see and build, even as we continue to do it for ourselves and with others. In terms of what that looks like for a resulting system, there's something about that which echoes my own experience. There's these kind of like artful integrations, in Suchman's words, hybrid systems composed of a lot of different devices where new interactions and more powerful integrations across and between devices and their settings of use are important. So kind of getting closer to the end, taking a step back, I want to recap some of the lessons I've learned. Looking to already existing practices elsewhere, looking what things were like in the not too distant past, looking at opportunities to make something new. Those aren't the only things I've adapted. I think the main one is that there's something powerful about acting like the thing you want to see in the world already exists. I also truly think one of my real skills is that I try to find a way to use a thing outside of maybe the context it wasn't intended to be used in. So some more specific bits that have helped me do that. First, doing it with others. This is a term from further field. It could mean in a lot of ways, by directly collaborating, by seeing yourself as part of a common cause, by engaging in forms of solidarity, like selecting the tools or services you use, finding those neighbors that you have more in common with. The image on screen is from Further Field's distributed campaign for emancipatory network art that they instigated back in 2006. It also leads me to the next one. Cite prior art and make those explicit connections, like this image, which is from the Lurk crew, who runs a lot of different shared infrastructure and collectively documents it, including post.lurk.org, which is a Mastodon instance. Next, embedding tech in larger experience, especially a social one, AKA LARP it or it didn't happen. I didn't even get to a part of our networks where one year we had Michael Coney join us to help create an alternative reality experience led through a series of workshops to kind of like prospectively think about some networking themes in an alternate reality. I'm using an meme, I think, of the internet here, lightning bolt. Next, by gluing existing things together. If it's done in an interesting way, I think it can be as relevant as building something brand new. I think, as you've seen, most of the software and tools I've mentioned are pretty straightforward. But I think used in the right spot or stitched together with others, they sort of get at something interesting. I've meandered. I'm about to reach the end. I wanted to close out by expanding on the kicker from my abstract. The future of computing should be more local, in ways that are located and therefore accountable, as doing something somewhere as opposed to a view from nowhere. And hopefully soon, in a way that relies on local first software. I'm ready to be an enthusiastic early adopter in as many uses as possible. It can also be brought to the present by acting like the thing you want to see in the world already exists, and by finding ways to do difficult things together and to be changed by that experience. And then finally, about that done together bit. There's about 1 million ways, all the unstructured ways we're already doing things together. But I've tried some of those more durable ones, forming a sort of collective, accidentally producing an event for many years, starting a formal legal entity, preferably a co-op or social enterprise, or being a part of a movement, something like, say, the Tech Worker Coalition. And sometimes my favorite move is volunteering to help out at someone else's thing. I'll stop there. Thank you.